So welcome back, or welcome to you. I hope that you've enjoyed the series and the experience. I hope it's been very interesting for you. This particular topic that I'm speaking on right now, does God play hide and seek, or why isn't God more obvious, is honestly a topic I never thought I would speak on. But as I told you, I used to live in Boston, and this was one of the number one questions that I would get asked over and over and over again. And so essentially what it did is it led me to then say, maybe I need to start looking at this and addressing it in a larger way, because it seems like it's a question that a lot of people have. And I get it. I get why people have this question. And oftentimes, the mindset that people have is they're like, look, Alycia, you're a Christian. If God wanted us to know he was there, if he wanted us to know who he was, then why doesn't he just show himself? What's the deal with all these games? Right? I get it. It's a fair question. And a lot of people wonder, why is it that it seems like if God wants to be known, it can be so difficult to figure out whether or not he's there? Now, I'm what's called a Christian apologist, which literally means I get paid to speak on one of the two questions you're not supposed to talk about if you want to maintain friendships with people. Right? So you're not supposed to talk about religion, and you're not supposed to talk about politics. And yet, I get to talk about religion all the time, and I think it's super fun. So this is one question of many. And people wonder why in the world God would be this way. It's almost as if they think of God playing, like we're playing this cosmic hide and seek game with God. In other words, how many of you played hide and seek as a kid? I won't ask how many you play it now. Notice how I did that. As a kid, how many of you played it? Okay, I loved hide and seek. It was super fun. I had a neighbor. She was like 6 years older than me, and I would play with her, and she would beat me because I was like 8 and she was not. So she'd always find me. But the point is, I loved it. You went up to the tree, and you closed your eyes, and you counted to like 30, and then you opened your eyes. And what happens? You just you have no idea where the person was, where they ran off, and where they hid. And so what you would do is you would just start walking. And maybe you're walking this way. And you don't find them, so then maybe you turn this way. And you kind of walk around, and you have no idea where you're going. You have no direction as to where you're going. And you hope that you stumble upon your friend. That's how a lot of people envision this journey of discovering God. That we're in this game of hide and seek. We don't know where he is, and so we're just walking. Maybe he's there. Maybe he's there. How am I ever supposed to know? But see, Christianity describes this a bit differently. Let's go back to this game of hide and seek again, and let me give you another way that we can think about this. We go up to the tree and we count to 30. We open up our eyes. We don't know where our friend is, but what if we start to walk this way? And all of a sudden we hear, warmer, warmer, you're getting warmer, or we hear, beep, beep. In other words, we can't see what's there, but there is some hint or some clue that we have that something is in that direction. I may not have found the friend yet, but something is giving me hints to keep going this way. That is how Christianity would understand this search, this quest for God. That there are clues that God gives us along the way to be able to discover who he is. But if I'm going to be honest with you, when you look at the Bible, it does talk about times in which God is hidden. It does. In fact, I want to show you some of those passages right now. This is Isaiah 45:15, where it says, "Truly you are a God who hides himself, O God of Israel, the Savior." And then again in Psalm 88, it says, "But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me?" So it does seem like there are times in which God does sometimes hide himself. But see, in Christianity, we talk of a God that wants to be found. When humankind was created, they were created to be doing life with God. That was the original intention of creation. God didn't create people because he was bored. God didn't create people because he was lonely. He He created people so that they could experience a morally perfect, the highest possible conceivable being that there is, all knowledgeable and perfect and powerful and loving, so that they could experience him. In other words, experiencing and knowing him is part of the reason why they're created. So then why would he hide himself? It seems to contradict the very reason. Well, maybe one way that we can think about this is actually that God does want to be found, but the way in which he reveals himself to us is going to be maybe slightly different than what we may have thought before we came into this room. In other words, how many of you have ever looked at a sunset? How many of you have ever looked at the ocean just hitting the beach over and over again, or watched the waves? Or maybe you've sat in a forest and listened to the birds and the animals run, and the trees and the wind through the leaves of the tree. In other words, if there was a way that God wanted to gently reveal himself to us or gives us clues of his existence, are there ways that he could do it? I remember talking to a friend of mine, this is a while back now, who's an atheist, does not believe in God. And I said to him, has there ever been a time in your life where you wish that there was a God? And he said, nope. Now keep in mind, at this point he was in his 70s. He's like, nope, there's never been a time in my life when I wish that there was a God. I've never really felt like a need for him or anything like that. And he said, but there have been times in my life when I have been struck by the beauty of creation and been sorry that there was no one to thank. How is it that a creation, a natural world, a cell, all of these things that we see and that we know of in this world are things that we don't even see, why do they always inspire such awe in us? So much so that this atheistic philosopher friend of mine wanted to thank the creator of it, but couldn't because he didn't believe in a creator of it. It was almost as if his experience with the natural world wasn't fully enough unless he was able to meet the being behind it. In other words, guys, if God wanted to reveal himself to us gently, is there a way that he could give us clues through the natural world that maybe there's something more? Now, what I'm not saying is you're going to look at a sunset and say, oh my goodness, Jesus lived and he was God and he died on the cross and he rose from the dead. No, no, no. All I'm saying is it possible the natural world is just telling us, warmer, you're getting warmer? In other words, it's just saying, is there something in this direction for you to go deeper in? Is it a clue? Is it a hint? Now, it doesn't help us understand everything about God, but maybe it just nudges us or pokes us that something might be there, and therefore it encourages us to even start the journey. Now, often people say to me, okay, well, that's cute and all, Alycia, but why doesn't God just come and strike as a lightning bolt? Like, really? What's with all the mystery in the nature? What's all the giving clues? Like, just come as a lightning bolt and show us and be done with it. So let's think about this for a second here, okay? So you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden a lightning bolt strikes in front of you. I am God. Boom. Is your initial reaction to run to it and get on your knees, oh, thank you, God, for showing yourself to me. You're so amazing. This is so great. Or is your initial reaction to run the other way? In other words, guys, if God came that strong, you wouldn't run towards him. You'd run away from him. He can't come in a way that is powerful. We think that that's what it will take for us to believe, and that if he just comes that way, we'll accept it. But that's not actually the case. Let me give you an example, because this actually did happen in the Bible itself. I want to read you what happens when God does come in a way like this and how the people respond. It says, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. So here we have thunder and lightning and a thick cloud over the mountain, a loud trumpet blast, and everybody's terrified. They're terrified to come to this mountain where God is because of all the ruckus that he's causing. It says, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." In other words, guys, not only did they get the lightning bolt, but they knew the lightning bolt was God. And they didn't want to go near because they were terrified. God can't come in such a strong way and be obvious in such a strong way because it won't make us want to come towards him. It'll make us want to run away from him. And if relationship with God is the goal, remember, he originally created us to do life with us. If that is the original creation order, then him coming strongly and pushing us away breaks that. So he can't come that way. So here we have the first answer to why God is partly hidden. If he fully showed himself to us, we would not be able to handle it, because in the presence of something so big and strong, we are very much aware of how weak we are, and we are filled with fear. But secondly, he's partly hidden because the relationship between him and us must be a choice. In other words, if he was so domineering in your life, you would feel like you are bound. Like you'd be like, oh, I can't breathe because you're just always right here. Most of you in here probably can drive a car. You drive one way when it's you just going down the street. You drive another way when a police car is behind you. Because the presence of that authority changes how you drive that car. God is partially hidden because if he was that strong authority, you would feel like, I can't breathe because he's always on my back. I can't drive because this police car won't get from behind me. So how could God reveal himself in a way where we wouldn't run in fear, where we wouldn't be scared, and where relationship would still be possible? I want to share with you a story by one of my favorite authors, my favorite author, a guy named Philip Yancey. And he shares this particular story about a fish tank. I don't know how many of you had dogs, cats, whatever growing up. My mother's from Jamaica, and they don't bring animals in the house. Some of you may come from cultures where that is also a thing. So the idea of having a dog or a cat in the house was just foreign to my mother. So I was allowed to have fish and a guinea pig, because the guinea pig could stay in the cage. So I had fish, and so fish are funny. Any of you have fish in here? Okay, so a few of you had fish growing up. Okay, so fish are funny. They're work. Okay, like you have the water evaporates, which as a kid I could never understand where the water went. Okay, but the water drops in the tank over time, and you got to make sure the water gets filled up. The tank gets dirty, so you got to make sure you clean it. Of course, you're feeding them every day. You got to check the water temperature. If you go out of town, you got to make sure somebody comes and feeds the fish. All of these things, right? But here's what's funny about fish. Even though they see me sitting on the couch watching TV, even though they see me feed them, even though they see me walk by, whenever I walk up to that fish tank and put my finger there or trying to go really close, what do? They swim away from me into that little house that they have or whatever. Or they go and swim behind their trees. Like, what's the deal, dude? Like, you literally see me all the time. Right? I'm here all the time. I feed you. I take care of your tank. Why is it that you keep swimming away from me? And from the fish's perspective, no matter how much I care for them, no matter how much I take care of them, all that they see is how big I am and how small they are. So if I wanted these fish to stop being scared of me, what could I do? I could become a fish. And if I became a fish, I would now be in the tank with them. And I would swim with them. and I'd hide behind their little trees with them. I would eat what they eat. I'd breathe what they breathe through their gills. I would be in their world. In other words, if I wanted the fish to know me and know who I was, I would need to become like them. There's an interesting verse in the Bible, guys, that says that Jesus, who Christians believe is God, who has come to earth, he is fully human, fully God. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the image of the invisible God. In other words, if you want to know what God is like, you can know by looking at Jesus. And we saw Jesus laugh with friends. We saw Jesus have friends. We saw Jesus have friends betray him. We saw Jesus hurt. We saw him cry when somebody died. We saw him go through a range of emotions, love for his friends, love for his mother and family. And through him, we can know what God is like. And here's the crazy thing, guys. He walked with us, and he ate with us, and he came as a baby. Because really, who is that scared of a baby? In other words, when God comes as a lightning bolt, we just want to run away. When God comes as a baby, it's like a magnet, especially for the women in the room. Somebody walks in with a baby and they're just like, "Zoomph. Oh my goodness, he's so cute, oh my goodness." You know, all of that. It's just natural for us. People are drawn to that. So if God wants to show us the more specific attributes of who he is, why he made us, why we're here, he does it through Jesus. He gives us general clues through the natural world around us that the journey is worth getting on to see if there's something at the end. But then he specifically shows us, while we're on that journey, what is at the end. Through Jesus and through the Bible itself. So God is partly hidden for our benefit, but he leaves us clues in the natural world. And then he shows us more specifically who he is through Jesus and the Bible. I want to show you this painting for a second. Have any of you ever seen this painting before? Okay, good. Not many of you have. So this is a painting by a gentleman named Holman Hunt. I believe it should still be hanging in Oxford. It was when I saw it. It was at Oxford, and people loved it so much that they asked him to paint two of it. So there's actually a second one. I can't remember where the second one is, but it's painted by a guy named Holman Hunt, and it's called Light of the World. And as you look at this painting, you're going to see some things. It looks like it's evening time, or maybe early in the morning, depending. I don't know. It looks more like a moon to me than a sun, but maybe it's either sunset. So in the evening time with the sunset, maybe it's even darker and it's a moon behind them. Regardless, there is this like angelic light going on behind him. And then we also see that he has like this robe on, like looks like a king or like a priestly kind of robe. And he's holding a lantern. And it looks like he's at some kind of house or shack or something like that. But it looks like it's not really being kept up very well because it looks like it's overgrown. Maybe somebody hasn't visited in a while. Maybe the person just stays inside. It doesn't look like it's well taken care of. As you're looking at this painting, can you tell me what is off about this painting or what is unique about this painting? Something is missing. By the way, I should mention too that looks like he's knocking on the door of this house. Anybody notice anything odd? What's different about this painting is that there's no door handle on the outside. In other words, he's knocking, but the handle's on the inside to open the door. And based on the crown of thorns that's on this gentleman's head, Holman Hunt is portraying this figure as Jesus with this kingly kind of robe. Jesus had a crown of thorns on his head as a mock crown when he was crucified. And his implication here is that he's knocking on the door, wondering if whoever's on the inside will open it up. What if you were on the inside of this door? What would it feel like for you? Would you, let's say the door is right here, and you hear this knocking. Would you, kind of go up and maybe, touch the handle? No, I don't know what to do. Maybe you touch it again, you're going to open it, and then you're like, no, I don't know if I want to open it. Maybe you're just kind of standing there, and you don't know what to do. You're not even touching the door handle. Maybe you're a person that says, if I run to another part of the house and pretend I'm not home. There's lots of reasons why somebody may not want to open the door, even if Jesus is knocking. Let me go through just a few of them with you. Some people might feel shame. They might have this aspect in which they feel like there's no way I would ever open up the door if I found out God existed, because it would mean that he would never want me, and he would have to tell me I'm too bad of a person. I've done too much wrong. I'm too much of a failure. I'm too much of a disappointment. Other people might be like the second person, where you got the little man and the big guy, and they might be saying, look, God, I'll open that door if you change this rule, if you do this thing, if you give me this, and the list goes on. In other words, if you meet my set of criteria, then I will open the door. Maybe you're like the third person who says, there's not enough evidence. I want more evidence. Why don't you give me more evidence and then I will believe? I remember when I was in England I don't even remember the university exactly anymore, and I was speaking with a young gentleman who was in his undergrad for, I think, astrophysics maybe? I can't quite remember, but something similar. And we were talking about, he was an atheist, and I said to him, what would it take for you to believe? And he said, a miracle. I would need to see a miracle, and then I believe. I said, okay. Well, what if I showed you right now on YouTube, true story, you can do this yourself, showed you a story, I'll show you this woman, her name is Alycia Knox. Alycia Knox is Knox. She was paralyzed because when she was in her early 20s, I believe, she was driving to her parents' house on Christmas Day, and she was hit by a drunk driver. As a result, she suffered a traumatic brain injury which left her paralyzed from the waist down. She was Hispanic, is Hispanic, traveled the world singing. She has an amazing voice. Traveled the world singing in her wheelchair. I've seen her with my own eyes in the wheelchair. One day she is at a church service. People are praying and asking for God to heal her so that she can walk. Somebody pulls out a camera and is videoing this. And this woman who hadn't walked at this point probably about 20 some odd years, kind of starts to push up and then falls back down. And push up and falls back down. After a few more minutes, she's able to push herself up and stand, very weakly and wobbly, but she's standing. And then she starts to take a step. Very jerky because her legs haven't worked in 20 some odd years. The video is on YouTube, Alycia Knox walking. You can check it out yourself. I saw her in a wheelchair. A few weeks after this, where she was able to walk, her walking was very, very good, and she goes home to Buffalo, New York, where she's from. The local Buffalo, New York TV is there. The Buffalo News is there because it was her dream to walk up the stairs to her parents' house, and so they could see her walking one last time before they died. And she gets out of this SUV in stiletto heels that are like this. And she walks up like the 6, 7 stairs to her parents, and her mom is at the top of the stairs just crying. The local news is there. She gets an award from the city or the mayor's office, something like that. This was a situation where a Christian woman who was paralyzed started walking, and the local news even acknowledged there is something here. So I said to this gentleman who wanted a miracle to believe, I got it for you, my friend. I got a miracle for you. You want one? I got one. Let me show you this. And you know what his response was to me? Well, it's possible that her brain spontaneously healed itself. I said, okay. And the thing is, this happened to me multiple times. I would get people who were atheists and scientists, and they would say to me, well, I need evidence. I want a miracle. And I would say, okay, let me show you this video. And over, well, her brain may have suddenly, we may not be able to explain it now, but one day we may be able to explain how her brain was able to just heal herself like that. So in other words, you said you wanted a miracle. I gave it to you, and you still don't want to believe. So is the issue that God isn't revealing himself with evidence? Or is the issue that you don't want it to be true? Maybe you're like the fourth person who just has their hands in their ears and says, I don't really want to hear, for a variety of reasons. Thomas Nagel is an atheist professor of philosophy and law, and he says, I speak from experience, being strongly subject to this fear myself. I want atheism to be true. He is an atheist. I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. We are more likely to suffer the consequences of our own hiding than to suffer the consequences of God being hidden from us. As someone who answers people's questions all the time about God, there's a lot that I can do for you. There's a lot that I can do to help you understand what the evidence might be, but the one thing I cannot make you do is believe. That I can't do. So we've taken a look at the idea that God gives us general clues that he's there through nature. He maybe just to get us on the journey, gives us specifically, helps us to understand specifically who he is through who Jesus is. But he can't come too strong because we'll run in fear, and so he comes gently so that we would want to draw close. But I want to share with you a quick story of some people that live in a remote part of the world, because oftentimes people say to me, but what about people who have never heard in these remote parts of the world? So I'm going to share with you a quick story. First of all, I do find it interesting that when we do run into these remote tribes in the forest or wherever, they tend to not be atheistic. In other words, they believe in a tree god, a sun god, an ancestor god, the spirits of their ancestors, the spirits of their father. Like, they tend to have some level of spirituality. I just find that interesting. I just have not run across any that have no concept or don't have a concept of there being something more. But regardless, back in the 1800s, a group of Christian missionaries went to a part of like northern India, what might be now considered northern India. And they went to a remote tribe there. And in this remote tribe, they began to realize we don't have the first idea how we are going to explain Christianity to these people. And so they started to share about Jesus and God, and the leader of the tribe said, hold on a second, stop. You need to hear our story first. And so this leader of the tribe begins to share this story. And he says, thousands of years ago, God created two people, a man and a female. And they were convinced by the devil to make an offering to the devil. And so they did, and then they drank rice beer, got drunk, and fell asleep. When they woke up, they realized that they were naked and they were ashamed of themselves. They went on to have 7 daughters and 7 sons. But they started doing a lot of really bad things. So God took 1 daughter, 1 son, put them up into a cave high in a mountain, and then sent a flood to destroy everything else. Remember, this is a remote tribe that's telling the story. Sends a flood to destroy everything else. After he destroys people, he takes those 2 out of the cave, brings them down, and they begin to populate the earth. And then the tribes grew and grew and grew, and they broke off into different clans. And one group decided, you know what, we want to actually move to a different area. So they broke off, started moving to a different area, only to come across a mountain range and realize we can't get through the mountain range. So they said, we need to figure out how to get through it. And so somebody came up with the idea, well, we need to pray to the gods of the mountains and ask for their help. So they prayed to the gods of the mountain. They were able to find a passageway through it, and they were able to get through. And the sage says, but here's where we have, or the tribe leader, I guess you could say, he says, this is where we have the problem. Because we are indebted to these spirits that we had to pray to, the spirit appeasement. And we still have to do sun worship and sorcery to this day for the fact that they got us through the mountain. But he's like, but the problem is that God can't be seen, even though he sees everything. And he created all, and he sustains everything. And he says, if we hadn't gotten so wrapped up in these mountain spirits and gods, then we would still know who the true God is. But God won't have anything to do with this now because we're unworthy, because we spent all this time worshiping the spirits. So the missionaries, after hearing this story, which seemed very similar to the story of God creating Adam and Eve from the Christian story, and then Adam and Eve being enticed by the devil to disobey God, and then realizing that they were naked, and then fast forward X amount of years, and God sends a flood to wipe out the world because of the evil that's in the world. The Christians are sitting here listening to the story, which is eerily similar to the Christian story that they have. And so they share this message about Jesus to this tribe, and many of them believe and become Christians. I truly believe, friends, that there is enough light for somebody to see God if they desire, and enough darkness for them to still be blind should they not want him. As I wind down here, I want to look at a story that communicates, I think, everything that I've been talking about why God is hidden, why he shows himself when he does, how he shows himself when he does. And I want to do it through a gentleman whose name is Francis Thompson. Francis Thompson was a British gentleman. His father was a medical doctor, and he did not want to be a medical doctor. This is back in the 1800s. I think, when was he born? So he was born in 1859. So he went to university to be a doctor like his father, because basically his father forced him, but he was not interested in being a doctor. He loved literature. He loved reading and poetry and writing. So he just kind of left school, just kind of stopped going and didn't tell his family. And he moved to London, and he began writing. But it was really hard. He couldn't get a job. He ended up selling cigarettes and newspapers and books, matches and newspapers and books. For 3 years, he became addicted to opium. He was hungry, he was starving, he was sick. And he decided that life wasn't worth living anymore. But then, he wrote some letters to a Catholic magazine. And the editor loved his poetry and sought out Francis Thompson. When he saw what a mess Francis Thompson was, he grabbed him, sent him off to a monastery to get cleaned up. And during that time at the monastery, he wrote a poem which is called The Hound of Heaven. If I read it to you in the Old English, you would all tune me out, because it's much harder to understand. So I'm going to read you a modern-day adaptation of it. This one is by Brian and Sally Oxley and Sonia Peterson. And in this poem that he writes, he basically sums up his life story. And so I want to read you a paraphrase. I'm not going to read you the whole thing because it's longer, but I want to read you a paraphrase of his life story. And this is how it goes. It says, I heard a story once, an incredible story, an amazing story. It told of one who was relentlessly faithful and loves with an unwavering love. It was said that he sorrows over broken people. It was said that he tirelessly pursues each lost one, never stopping or never giving up. But if I let him in, what would I have to give up? What would I have left that I could say was mine? Anyways, it was just a story. Just a story. But if it was only a story, then why did thoughts of him trouble my dreams, glimpses in the moonlight and glimmers in the starlight and whispers in the midnight breeze? Gradually, the whispers became a sound perceptible only late at night when all the world was silent and asleep, except for me and my pounding heart and the distant sound coming closer. Soon I could hear it by day as well, stronger and constant, unhurrying, and now I could tell what it was, the beat of footsteps. Footsteps down the street, footsteps on the sidewalk, footsteps outside the door. He was coming, the one I'd heard about, coming for me, and so I fled. I sought to fulfill every desire that life could offer, but the greater the promise of fulfillment, the greater the letdown, the more intense my cravings became. But the footsteps kept coming nearer. He was chasing me. The desires I had found consumed me more and more, and I was never content. I feared if I opened my heart, he'd rush in and I'd be allowed nothing of my own. So I turned away, hoping he wouldn't notice me. And I ran until there was emptiness and broken dreams. I turned to doing good, helping the poor, the orphan, but the aching for something more never left. The aching for something greater never left, and I decided to give up on everything. My life was not valuable. Why even live anymore? Why not end the pain now? But then in utter desolation, like a gentle breeze that washed over and around me, I felt the tenderness of him. I had no fight left, so I finally listened. Which of those you fled to loves you? I heard him say. And my heart answered, nobody but you, only you. And then he said, you will have no rest until you rest in me. Come take my hand and rise. In the darkness of my gloom, I saw his outstretched hand, and I heard these words, though you would not see it, I'm the one you've been seeking all your life. And so in that moment, after all the endless miles and all the fruitless searching, I finally quit my running and reached up to the one who had sought me for so long. The lost one was finally found. He required nothing beyond acceptance. The peace I'd longed for and never known flooded my heart, and in having nothing of my own, nothing but his love, I found everything I had lacked. I was finally complete, finally at rest. It is us that run and hide. Well, God actually relentlessly seeks after. Remember what I said in the beginning. If humanity was created to be in relationship, oftentimes we think back that God is just sitting back, folding his arms and just watching us run around, trying to figure out if he's there. Saying, oh, you're not getting it right. Oh, you're not getting it right. But actually, he's part of the discovery. He's actually active in the journey, giving us clues and giving us hints that he is there. And so he gives us enough of himself to make relationship possible, but he withholds enough of himself so that relationship is possible. What does God have to do to be more obvious? Does he need to come as a lightning bolt and thunder and all of these things? No. How about an earthquake? No. How about a whirlwind? No. Or perhaps he's obvious enough in that still small whisper that lets us know we're not alone. That tells us, as my friend said in the beginning of this talk, I've been struck by the beauty of creation and been sorry that there was no one to thank. I'm going to turn to a time of Q&A in about 2 minutes. I just want to share with you one last thing, and then we will have a time of Q&A. Some of you are athletes, may have been athletes in here like I was. So let's pretend that we're all soccer players. Do I have any soccer players in here? Okay, I've got a few. Yep, few around. Okay. Soccer. We're all going to be 16 again. No, 15 because we can't drive. So we're all going to be 15 again. And we're out, let's say it was a rainy day. So the field was really muddy and really dirty. But you're out playing with soccer with your friends and you're having fun. Maybe you scored a goal. Let's say you scored a goal. So you are full of mud. You are sweaty. It's not good, but you had a great game, so who cares? Your mom comes to pick you up, right, because you can't drive. So mom comes to get you, and she's like, how was the game? You're like, oh, it was great. We won. It was so much fun. I scored a goal. And she's like, that is so great, honey. By the way, we got an invitation to the governor's house tonight. And the dinner starts in 30 minutes. We have to go straight there. I can't bring you home. And you're like, what? What are you talking about? Here you are in your cleats, your dirty sneakers, your shin guards, you've got mud, you got sweat. I mean, you don't smell like roses, let's say. And now you're going to the governor's house? So you're thinking, as you're driving there, you're like, okay, you know what? As long as he doesn't see me, I'm going to be okay. And so you get there, and your goal is just to kind of stay in a corner. You get there, and you're only there for 3 minutes, but what happens? The governor and his wife come around the corner. And he's in his tuxedo, and she's in her beautiful gown, and you just want to die. So what do? Because remember, you're 15, you just hide behind mom. Let me just hide here, because hopefully he doesn't see me. What just happened here? An hour ago, you were just on the field playing soccer and having a great time. You didn't care that you were dirty. But the minute you stepped in the presence of somebody who was clean, like the governor in his tuxedo and his wife in that ball gown, all you could sense was your dirt. All you could feel was how filthy you were and how clean they were. And so you want to hide. And as you're hiding behind mom, you feel this hand pull you out from behind her. And as you come out from behind her, you see the governor, and he's looking right at you, and he gives you a big hug. And he says, thank you so much for coming. And in doing that, your mud got on his beautiful tuxedo, your sweat got on his tuxedo, everything. And he is just saying, I'm so happy that you came. Perhaps, friends, God comes in the ways that he does is because if he came strong and powerful, all we would see is how dirty and filthy we were, and we would run and hide. So potentially he comes in the way that he does, because this is the way in which we would not want to run away from him. And so he comes as one of us. And he doesn't ask you to get clean first. He just asks you to come. And in so doing, get your dirt on him and your sweat. But he's happy that you came. With that said, I want to stop there because I want to give you guys some time for Q&A. I know we got Slido as an option. You're also able to ask me live questions as well. So if you have any questions on anything I said or didn't say, or on a topic that's not related to this, you're welcome to ask me on that. And we can also jump to the Slido as well.
All right, would you all join me in thanking our speaker? All right, so we have a microphone at the back, which will be coming round. If you have a question, please raise your hand. In the meantime, I will ask a question from Slido. There are a few questions related to how God shows himself, the methods that he might use. I think I'll ask one of them and then perhaps a couple of the others as follow-up. So in the Bible, God had verbalized back and forths with Adam, Cain, Abraham, Moses, Gideon, and many others. without their brains exploding or freedoms violated. Why not us? And can I add another one to that? You said God coming strongly would turn us away. What about Saul of Tarsus or Paul in his conversion?
Great. Thank you so much. These are great questions. So let me agree with that statement, because I think the statement is the question is partially answering himself. God does come strongly to certain people, absolutely. Hence Paul, like you mentioned, and Adam and Eve, of course, that was a different situation because he was all they had. But still, other people, Moses and Abraham and all these other people. There are times when God does come very directly, absolutely. It just isn't every time. It just isn't every time. So Paul had that experience, but there's other people who didn't, as an example. So there are times when he does come and speaks to people directly, but listen to what happens when he encounters Paul. For those of you who aren't sure of this story, let me just say this. Paul was a guy who was actually not, he was not a follower of Jesus. After Jesus died and rose from the dead and was gone, Paul was encountering these Christians, and he was challenging the Christians. He didn't like the Christians. He was persecuting them. And while he's on a journey, basically he gets a message from God directly. Paul, why are you persecuting me? Why, look at what you're doing. Why is it so hard for you to believe? And basically Paul's like, who is this? And he says, I'm Jesus that you're persecuting. In that moment, Paul is face to face with the reality of who God is. And you know what he's doing? He's like on the ground. He's hearing this voice. He's scared. Getting back to what I was saying, but when God comes this way, it isn't always joyful. He's scared as what's going on. He actually ends up losing his sight. But he also doesn't necessarily have the opportunity or the possibility of saying no, because now he's in full face-to-face interaction with Jesus. Here is the thing. If God does it every time, it does start to get to the point where it's like people feel like they can't, everybody believes because they can't say no, because he was so in their face. For Paul, that's how God came to him. But he doesn't do that with many other people that you read in the Bible. So yes, God does come in those ways. And there are times when people are scared, and when he does, there are times people are not scared because they know they don't have something to be scared of. And there's plenty of other people where God doesn't come to in that way. So the point is, it's going to be a range of things. It is not always going to be one way. But the problem is, we say, unless you come this way, then it won't be. Then I won't believe. So here's just a classic example. Many people who are Muslims actually end up becoming Christians because God comes to them in such a very direct kind of way. Within Islam, they believe that God speaks through dreams. And there are many Muslims who have dreams where Jesus says, I am God, and that changes them. Why? He doesn't do that for everybody. And so the thing that needs to be understood here is there are times when he is very direct. There are times when he hides. So it is going to be the combination of both. So thank you. That was a great question for the several people that asked that in combination. I saw a hand somewhere. Was that your hand? It went up and then went down. Yeah.
Could you hold on a moment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. We're going to bring you a microphone.
Microphone travels to you.
So Jesus Christ said, ask and it shall be given you, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened.
Great.
So why do so many people seek for God and maybe end up in a religion other than Christianity? Or maybe they're a former Christian and they eventually leave.
Okay, can you tell me tell me the specific passage,
Yes.
verse, or are you reading that verse?
Yes,
Okay.
I am. I'm reading Matthew 5.
It is.
Matthew 7 through 8.
Yeah. Okay, and what's the verse, you know? You said Matthew 7?
7 through 8.
What's the chapter then?
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7, verse 8.
Chapter 7, verses 7 and 8.
Got you. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand you. Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, let me read this to you. Read it again so everybody could make sure they understand this. This is Jesus speaking to a wide range of people. It actually starts in chapter 5, and this is the end of it. It goes chapter 5, Matthew 5, chapter 6, and then it goes chapter 7. So here's what it says. It says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks the door will be open. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your God in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you'd have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. When you continue to read in this passage, it's indicating something different than the end part of your question. So it's not talking about everybody who seeks is going to, it's not talking about everybody who seeks for God is going to find him. And that's not what it's saying, although I do think that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about. What it's actually talking about is gifts and things that we are giving. When you ask God for something, that's why he goes on to say, if you're evil, you know how to give gifts to your children, how much more will your God in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him, do to others what you'd have them do to you, etc. Okay, so it's talking a bit about more actions, but I like your question. So I want to go to your question because I think it's a great one. I think it's a really good one. Why do so many people who seek for God end up in other religions? And then what was the second one? Many Christians leave. Great. All right. Sorry? What was that last part?
After seeking for truth.
Many Christians leave, they're seeking for truth. So let's go with the first one. Many people seek and end up in other religions. Absolutely true. There's a plethora of reasons why that happens. For some people, they actually don't ever really look at other belief systems. Okay? Some people, based off of, I hear people say to me a lot, the only reason you're Christian is because you grew up in America. And that boggles my mind, actually. And I guess America still has this title of America's a Christian nation. That makes no sense to me. The way I grew up in New York is there was all of like 2 or 3 Christians, maybe 5 actually, in my high school, my entire high school. Everybody else was an atheist. So where I grew up, everybody was an atheist. So I think of America as an atheistic nation. I do not think of it as a Christian nation. So it always puzzles me when people say, well, you're just a Christian because of where you grew up. But regardless, we all get to the point, usually it's somewhere between 14 and 24, no matter where we're born, no matter what age, no matter what we were raised with, where we begin to ask and question what we believe in. So this is also getting to the second part of your question as well, why so many Christians leave. We begin to question. And when we don't find answers that seem satisfactory to us, whether we're a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, an atheist, agnostic, whatever, when we don't find an answer that is satisfactory to us, or answers, I should say, usually it's several, then it makes us say, I no longer want this. Some people say, yeah, my questions aren't getting answered. This doesn't seem to make sense. Other people say, there's no evidence behind this. I just believe this because my parents told me it was true, and I just followed along. But I don't think it's true anymore because I want to look at evidence. So some people find a lack of evidence, and then they say that's why that they don't believe that. For other people, why they may walk away, because I don't think it's just Christians that leave their faith. There's atheists who convert, there's Hindus who convert to something else. This happens amongst many different belief systems. For other people, they just want more autonomy. Oftentimes, religions are going to have moral codes, and they're going to encourage people to take part in the moral code. If somebody chooses that they don't like that moral code, they don't want it, they feel, well, I actually want to do my own thing. So that's another reason. My point is, my friend, there are so many reasons. I just gave a few, but there's so many reasons why somebody who may be a Christian or whatever religion they are ends up leaving. Same thing as to why is it some people who seek for certain things don't end up a Christian. I guess is probably what you're asking me. And because I think oftentimes, for the same reasons, they're seeking for things and maybe they meet Christians who aren't really helpful in answering those questions. Maybe once again, they don't feel like there's really good evidence for Christianity. They find another religion more persuasive. Maybe they find that they don't like the morality of Christianity, that they want this thing because this belief system or lack of belief over here is more in line with what they think should be true. The reasons on that side are numerous as well. But I would say this. Ultimately, what I ask for people to do is be willing to jump on the journey and take it honestly where it lands. If you want truth, that's ultimately where I want somebody to go. I do not want anybody in this room to be a Christian because I say so. I don't want anybody in this room to be a Christian because mommy and daddy say so. I want somebody to be a Christian because they actually believe that this is true. And so that, my friend, is ultimately what I would say, that I would encourage people who are seeking to actually to interrogate whatever the belief is. Run it through the ringer. I was a criminal justice major, right? So I'm like, show me the evidence. Where does it land you? That's what I want. And that's the same approach I want people to have. So thank you for both of those questions. They were very good. Am I going back to Slido? Or?
Yes, I'll ask two questions from Slido that are similar. One is from James, who asks, many people of all religions get evidences that theirs is the true one. How do we know our evidences actually come from the God we think it does? And a similar one from Joseph. You say God gives hints. What do these hints look like? How do we know they're hints for the Christian God and not, for example, Jupiter?
Oh, such good questions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can you read me just the first one more time? Sorry, when there's two, I tend to forget one of the questions.
Yeah, so it was, many people of all religions get evidences that theirs is the true one. How do we know our evidences actually come from the God we think it does?
Oh, so those are actually different questions. That's interesting. How do we, okay, so the first one, all right, let me tackle the first one, and then you can reread me the second one. Because actually what this one is asking is, how do I know that the evidence I'm getting, and so therefore what I'm following is actually the God that I think exists?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's a great one. Because nobody wants to be deceived into following something that may or may not be true. I think I can actually probably combine this with the second one. I think for me, let me just give you an example of a very condensed version of maybe part of where I am today with Christianity. Being a criminal justice major, whenever you enter into a situation where it seems like somebody may or may not be guilty of a particular crime, let's say, you always want to let the evidence direct you. When you go into something with a pre-bias, that's how we end up sending guilty people. We let guilty people free, or we send innocent people to prison. We need to be able to suspend judgment and allow the evidence to lead us to where it goes. Okay? So let me just give you an example. If I have a friend who I talk to on a regular basis, and I feel like, and I know that she's not in a good situation with her husband, that there's some violence there, and all of a sudden I don't hear from her for a couple days. I call, I text, and there's nothing. So I decide to go to her house. I go to her house and I knock on the door, no answer. I try the door handle, and the door opens up. The house isn't even locked. I'm like, well, that's weird. As I go in, it looks like some of the furniture is like moved or disheveled, like some stuff looks like it's pushed over, and at that moment, I'm calling out her name and I'm not hearing anything. Is it irrational for me at that point to pick up the phone and call the police? I may not be able to tell them, this is where she is, this is where he is, that this is what's happened here. I may not be able to outline it all. But based on the evidence that I have, it seems like something is wrong here. So my first step is just letting me know alerts, let's say. And what's going to happen? I'm going to call the police, they're going to come, and they're going to conduct a more thorough investigation. And in conducting a more thorough investigation, then they're going to get to the bottom of it. For me, the thorough investigation is very important. And so, when I look at Christianity, I look at the big questions that we have in life. So kind of the four big ones are like, how did we get here? Kind of what we call origins. Meaning of life. Why are we here? Who am I? How do we live? And I actually had a fifth one. What happens when we die? Okay? So when I look at those 5 questions, I see answers for them in Christianity, but here's the thing. Islam would have answers for that. Hinduism would have answers for that. Those 5 things, those answers to those things aren't necessarily going to be unique to Christianity. Other religions are going to have answers to that. So then I keep going. I've gotten these first 5, so then I keep going. Number 6, Jesus. What do I do with this guy, Jesus? We know he lived. We know he had followers. We know he's a wise man. We know he was crucified. We know that the guy who crucified him was named Pontius Pilate. And we know something happened 3 days later. And those 6 things that I just told you are all written outside of the Bible. I don't need the Bible for those 6 facts. Those are written from Roman historians and Jewish historians, etc. So I don't need the Bible to know that he lived, that he had followers, that he was crucified, that Pontius Pilate crucified him, and that something happened 3 days later, because those are all, I can get that all from external documentation or historical narrative. So the fact that today is January, 31st, is because this man walked the earth. Not that he was born in the year 0. Not that the calendar is exactly right, but the point was his entrance into this world changed everything. The fact that your birthday is what it is because he lived. What do I do with him? Who was he? That's going to be point number 6. What do I do with the fact that he died and nobody seems to have any explanation as to where his body is? Nobody's claimed to have it. Nobody claimed to steal it. Nobody claims to have seen it. It's just gone. This evidence for his resurrection, what do I do with that? How about the Bible? How about the fact that there's historical cities mentioned in the Bible that many of them we've been able to discover, or archaeological facts that we've been able to match up? What do I do with the fact that the narratives in the Bible or in the cities and the places oftentimes match up with other archaeological digs? What do I do with that? In other words, some of these things can be answered generally by religions. Some of them get more specifically and bring me to Christianity. So I think, in lieu of the second question, I think that is where I find, is based off of where I land, that's how it's given me confidence to land in Christianity. Can you read it one more time so I make sure I answered it?
You say God gives hints. What do these hints look like? How do we know they're hints for the Christian God and not for another God like Jupiter?
Right. And so that's why once I hit Jesus, Jupiter's out. Okay? Because he's not teaching me, he doesn't teach me about Jupiter. So once I become confident who Jesus is, that's going to eliminate a series of other belief systems. The minute I say I believe Jesus died on the cross, I'm eliminating multiple religions. Sorry, I'm eliminating, that's not true. I'm eliminating one major world religion the minute I say he died on the cross. The minute that I say that I believe that he actually was God, now I've eliminated, and that there is not, let's say, 300 million gods, now I've just eliminated Hinduism. So in other words, the more that I discover, the more it starts to eliminate other possibilities, which probably makes sense, right? The more that you learn about something, the more the other possibilities, the other likelihoods that something else is true starts to fade. Because the further you go down this, it narrows your possibilities. And so I think that is where I would land, and that would give me confidence in that. Thank you. Thank you for those questions.
I think we have time for one more question. Any come to mind? Yes, here at the front.
Oh, I see you. My friend who I was talking to.
I'll just hand you my microphone.
Instead of the thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening display from God, why not something like, Gideon, did the fleece test, and Elijah did the altar lighting test, or for that matter, just, Jesus staying around after resurrecting rather than floating off into the sky a few days later. I mean, that'd be pretty convincing, right?
Well, you'd think. Great question, my friend. He stayed around for about 40 days afterwards, okay? And so people did see him afterwards, and that is actually what convinced the disciples. So you ask a very good question, because he did show himself in some of these lighter ways that you're talking about to his disciples and to the people around him, and they still didn't believe. Let me give you some examples. He healed blind people. Other people that were lame, that couldn't walk, he helped them walk. He raised a guy from the dead. Many are familiar with the story of Lazarus. Guy who had died. Jesus comes, Lazarus is dead for 4 days. Jesus comes. Many people know Lazarus is dead because in that day they have these professional wailers, like professional criers at a funeral. And so they're crying and making a fuss over his death. It wasn't a secret that Lazarus died. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and the response is that some people do believe, but other people start to plot, because they're so angry with what Jesus did, they began to plot how they might kill Jesus for raising Lazarus from the dead, and how they might kill Lazarus again. So in other words, these weren't lightning bolts. His followers, his disciples, saw him walk on water, and they still doubted him. This is why I spent time on that section about, is the issue that he's not doing some of these gentler things like you suggest, or is the issue that we never accept what he offers? When nothing is ever good enough for belief. It really wasn't until he rose from the dead that his followers were actually like, okay, wait a minute, now we believe this. And even when the other religious people heard that he rose from the dead because his disciples were teaching it, they were mad at the disciples. They were killing them, they were killing followers, not necessarily disciples. They were punishing the disciples. They were killed one particular guy named Stephen for his teachings. So even after they said, look, we've seen him alive, he's raised, and they were teaching this stuff, other people are still like, no, you can't teach this. This didn't happen. In other words, it's kind of going back to the story of the gentleman I was telling you about in England, where he wanted a miracle of some kind of evidence of God, and I show him this woman who was paralyzed and is now walking to this day, but that wasn't enough. So I hear you with the fleece, right? But he was willing to accept from God. He already believed in God. That was about him trying, God, can you confirm to me that this is really what you want to happen? He already believed. The challenge is for people who don't believe, it seems to me that even when God gives them all of these different evidences and hints and clues, that it's never enough. So the question might be, is why is it that we are never satisfied with the stuff that he gives us? And I wonder if that's more the issue. It's not that he isn't doing it, it's that we aren't satisfied. We always want more, because why do we want to fight belief? Why is it never enough? And I think that's the question. And so even the person who had earlier asked on Slido, what are these other hints that God can give? Those are them. These are the other hints that God often does, even to this day. What I find, my friend, I'll give you another one, and then I have a friend in Africa, because often people say to me, why doesn't God heal amputees? There's a whole website, why doesn't God heal amputees.com? I don't even know if it's around anymore, but there was. Anyways, my friend, Christian, was praying for a guy and watched his leg grow back. He was an amputee. Watched the leg grow back. If I could show that to people, would they believe? Some might. But what seems to me is that miracles and these little hints oftentimes bring short-term change or short-term impact on some people. Other people are just, I believe and I'm in. Other people, it brings like a short-term change, and then there's more levels of resistance. And that's why I really went back to that slide about, is it that we're plugging our ears? Because I don't know, what more can God do when he's already come to earth? And so hopefully that kind of gives you some thoughts on that. Does that help? Do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, yes, according to the Gospels, according to the Gospels, it said that he was there for 40 days or some number of days. But the thing is that he then, went up into the sky after that. An immortal, invulnerable, someone on earth for 2,000 years. I mean, it's like, when the apostles are allegedly preaching about this guy having resurrected and him conveniently going off into the sky is kind of like, the dog ate my homework. Like, why can't we just produce him right now? That kind of thing.
Sure, I hear you, my friend. But here is the thing. Here's the thing. I think it still is asking for one more, right? I think it's still saying, well, if he was here walking on earth, then I would believe. But the thing is, he did. Like, this actually happened where he was here on earth and people didn't believe. I see, once again, I think we get ourselves in this cycle as if God did this, then I would believe. But I look back and I'm like, well, God did do that and people didn't believe. I don't like to think I'm really any that different than them. Because he did walk. He was on earth for 30 some odd years. And people didn't. So we could say, well, if he was around even longer, maybe if he stayed around another 200 or 300 years, well, surely people would believe. We don't know that. What we do know is that when he was walking on earth and raising people from the dead and healing people and walking on water and doing all these things, they didn't believe. So I lean more towards, I don't know if another 200 years really would have done it. Because then we would have said, well, why didn't you stay around for 300 years? Then if we, okay, fine, I'll be around for 2,000 years. Fine. Then the people 3,000 years later say, well, you should have stayed around for 3,000 years. 2,000 wasn't enough. In other words, we're always going to push the goal line back.
And why isn't he still here is the question. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Why isn't he said, why isn't he still here? That's the question. Exactly. So if he had stayed here for until 2023 and then said, okay, now it's time to go, then people in 2025 would have been like, well, you should have stayed here 2025. And then I would have believed. In other words, we just keep saying, I want more, I want more, I want more. And at some point we have to realize, is the issue that God didn't do enough? Or is the issue that we're never satisfied with what he's given us? And that's what we have to ask ourselves. And so I think it's a valid question. I'm not convinced that if he had stayed around longer, it would have brought about the change that we wanted. And here's the other thing, my friend. If ultimately what God wants is relationship with you, relationship with me, relationship with all of us here, then ultimately he's got to give us the ability to say no. And maybe him staying around for 2,000 years would have taken away our ability to say no. Relationship can only exist, guys, if you have the possibility of not being in that relationship. If I come up to somebody here and I say, tell me you love me, and I'm holding a knife to your throat, you might say, I love you, but you're not feeling really great love for me. Why? Because I took away your ability to say no. The minute I try and force you into loving me is the minute you actually resent me. It's the minute you actually hate me. So I have to make sure that if I want relation with you to happen, I have to make sure you have a way out. So him staying around for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm so overly convinced that he's real. Okay, but he's also affected your ability to say no because he was too obvious in your face.
He affected the apostles in order to say no?
No, because they did. They did say no. That's the thing. But the resurrection did. The resurrection, when they saw that, then they were convinced. The apostles basically got to the point. So this is great. So he said, but it didn't affect the apostles' ability to say no, which is a great question. So here's the thing. The apostles got to the point where they finally had to say, I believe. That was it. Because it was miracle and evidence after evidence, and they kept saying, no, 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 no. And they got to the point where they finally had to believe. And I'll end on this short story then, because I'm assuming our time is done. I'll end on this short story because this is a really good question. I'm glad that you asked it. Jesus raises raises from the dead. He appears to his disciples for the first time, his followers, and he appears to them. And they are like, oh my goodness, like you really risen from the dead. But they weren't all there. Not all of his followers were there. A little bit later on, Thomas comes. And this Thomas was one of his followers. And the disciples like, we just saw Jesus. And Thomas is like, oh, no, no, no. I saw him die. You didn't see him. I don't believe it. I want to see the nail prints and scars in his hands and in his side. I need to touch him. You're not going to fool me with this nonsense. What is Thomas saying? I want evidence. He's my kind of guy. He says, I want evidence. Fair. A little bit later on, Jesus comes back to Thomas. Jesus comes back. Thomas is there. And he says, Thomas, you want to touch me? You want to say, fine. And he says, Thomas, something very interesting. He says, stop doubting and believe. Stop doubting, Thomas, and believe. That believe, and if you look at the original Greek language, is the word what's called pistos. The Greek word is pistos, which is what we translate the word to faith in English. He's essentially saying, stop doubting and have faith. This is why when people say to me, faith is blind, I'm like, not in Christianity. Jesus literally saying, stop doubting and have faith in me because of the evidence I've just given you. Faith is based on evidence in Christianity, okay? All that to say, he essentially tells Thomas, stop doubting and believe. At some point, Thomas, you have to make the decision to stop demanding more evidence. And you've got to believe. Essentially what he's saying to him. And Thomas was there throughout his life. He saw him do the miracles. He saw him do the things. And he still didn't believe. And finally, Jesus is calling him to the carpet and saying, now's your moment, Thomas. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to believe now? Because you've got to end this. Questioning, wanting more. You've got to end it. And Thomas says, my Lord and my God, and believes. 20 some odd years later, Christian tradition tells us Thomas goes to India. And he talks about and teaches Jesus in India. And that's why you'll see so many Indians with the last name Thomas to this day. You will trace the Christian church in India. They will say that they are descendants from Thomas's teaching. When I was in Chennai several years back, I got to go to Thomas's, what they believe is Thomas's tomb. There's some question whether it really is. Regardless, it was in this church in Chennai. And in Chennai, I went down into this tomb, in this chapel area, and it's really quiet. And at the end, you see this like glass case surrounding this tomb, this coffin, I guess you could say. And as you walk up to it, they wrote 5 words on this casket, on this encasement, I guess you could say, around it. And those 5 simple words on Thomas's tomb were, my Lord and my God. Christian tradition tells us that Thomas was eventually killed for his faith, because at that point, he decided to finally believe. The question, my friend, I assure you, is not that God has not given us enough evidence. We will continuously ask for more. At some point, we need to stop doubting and say, I will now trust him, and I will believe in who he is. Thank you for that question. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Alycia. Thank you all for your questions. Before we leave,